I woke up to find my neighbor swinging a sledgehammer at my fence like she was breaking out of Alcatraz. Except she wasn't trying to escape. She was trying to prove a point. "You can't block off my trail," she shouted, every swing landing closer to my poor marigolds, which, last I checked, weren't part of any HOA hiking path. Her name was Tamara Whitlow, and if you've never lived next to someone who thinks an oversized house comes with extra land rights, count yourself lucky. She wasn't just a neighbor, she was a one-woman zoning committee, HOA president and everything but title, and queen of Pine Hollow for the last 15 years. And apparently my new fence had offended her royal decree. The funny thing is, I didn't move here to start a war. I moved here to breathe. 5 acres of pine, a creek running through the back, trilliums popping up like shy little miracles. It was everything I'd dreamed of while I spent 10 years landscaping office parks for people who thought gravel was a personality. I scraped together every dollar to buy this land, and I did it by the book. Deed, survey, permits, even a topo map with color-coded lines. But Tamara didn't care about maps. She cared about momentum. She'd been leading her little community hikes right through my property for years, snacking, littering, letting dogs run wild, like she was some suburban Lewis and Clark. And when I politely put up a private property sign, she took it as a personal betrayal. Now I know what you're thinking. Maybe it was an honest mistake. Maybe she really didn't know the trail ran through land that wasn't hers. Trust me, I thought that too. So I approached her group one morning, property documents in hand, smiling like a fool who still believed in neighborly conversations. "Excuse me," I said, pointing to the survey stakes like a polite forest ranger. "This path actually cuts across my property. Just wanted to let you know." Tamara didn't blink. She just looked me up and down, smiled like I'd spilled something on her rug, and said, "Oh, you must be the new guy. That trail's been here longer than you have. It's a community fixture." The way she said it, you'd think I'd tried to bulldoze a national monument. I explained the damage to the plants, the erosion along the creek, the understory species I was trying to protect. She laughed, literally laughed, and said, "Honey, a few wildflowers aren't worth shutting people out of nature. The HOA will handle this." That night, I called Sam, my college buddy turned lawyer, and asked him straight up, did I have a case or was I about to get chewed up by bylaws and busybodies? Sam scanned the deed and said, "Unless there's a formal easement on record, which there isn't, you're good. You can fence it, post it, and tell them to take a hike." I thanked him, heated up a frozen burrito, and sat in my half-unpacked house feeling equal parts vindicated and exhausted. Tamara didn't just radiate confidence, she weaponized it. And I had the sneaking suspicion she wasn't done. Turns out I was right. By morning, the Pine Hollow community page had a post titled, "New Resident Threatens Trail Access." My name wasn't mentioned, but the timing wasn't subtle. The comments poured in. Some people have no respect for tradition. Probably one of those city types. Why do they always think money means they can just take over? I sat there, drinking burnt coffee and watching digital strangers argue over who I was. I wasn't some corporate transplant here to pave paradise. I grew up on the east side of Portland, son of a mechanic and a part-time florist. I saved, planned, and dreamed of a patch of forest where I could finally work with nature instead of around it. But to them, I was the villain in a story Tamara had already written. I didn't just block a trail, I challenged a power structure built on familiarity and fear. So I did the only thing that felt right. I went to the hardware store, bought a better sign, and nailed it to a cedar post at the trail's entrance. No yelling, no confrontation. Just bold letters that said, "Private property. No trespassing." I thought I was drawing a boundary. Turns out, I was lighting a fuse. The next time it happened, I was ready with my camera. Not that I expected to catch anything particularly scandalous, just a group of retirees in windbreakers and Tamara leading the pack like she was hosting a PBS nature special. She strutted through my land with the confidence of a park ranger who'd issued herself her own badge. The way she pointed to things, you'd think she planted the trees herself. "And this," she said to her little group, gesturing toward a patch of ferns, "is part of the original trail we've used for years." I watched from the porch, coffee in hand, wondering if she even knew what plant she was standing on. Spoiler, she didn't. Because 5 minutes later, someone trampled a whole cluster of rare trilliums, the same ones I'd been babying for months. Just like that, they were gone, crushed under the souls of folks who probably thought they were communing with nature. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't infuriating. These people came through my property with their granola bars and eco-friendly water bottles, talking about preserving the forest, while leaving behind candy wrappers like breadcrumbs from a Hansel and Gretel reboot. And Tamara? She just smiled, gave me a neighborly wave like she wasn't actively directing foot traffic through private land. I tried reasoning again, caught up with her at the creek, politely, clipboard in hand, like someone trying to schedule a truce rather than a lawsuit. "Tamara," I said, keeping my tone as neutral as a park sign, "this is protected habitat. These plants take years to recover, and there's no public easement. It's private." She nodded as if she was listening, then delivered a smile so polished it could have been sponsored. "Oh, Graham," she said sweetly, "some things are more important than property lines." That's when I realized she didn't believe she was trespassing. She believed she was preserving history, and I was just the footnote standing in her way. It wasn't just the hiking. It was the performance. Tamara spoke like she was reciting lines from a community theater production called The Trail Belongs to Us. She told people the trail had been used for decades, that it was part of Pine Hollow's charm, and that anyone trying to block it must be new or not from around here. I heard all this through the grapevine. Translation: Clara, my neighbor with 2 kids and an HOA fine for having backyard chickens, she swung by with coffee and the kind of warning that sounds casual but lands heavy. Tamara's stirring up sympathy, says you're trying to gate off a community legacy. She's talking about hosting a guided walk next week. A guided walk through my forest. I stared out at the creek where the crushed trilliums used to bloom and felt a quiet kind of anger settle in. Not rage, just the slow burn that starts when someone rewrites your story and makes you the villain. That night, I called Sam again, my lawyer/therapist at this point. He listened while I vented about the crushed plants, the candy wrappers, the sanctimony of trail talk delivered by someone whose boots still had store tags on them. Then he said something I wasn't prepared for. "Legally, you're in the clear. But legal doesn't mean easy. You're going to win this, it's just going to suck for a while." I leaned back in my chair, surrounded by moving boxes I hadn't touched in a week, and realized what he meant. I could quote survey lines all day, but that wouldn't undo the gossip, or the passive-aggressive social media posts, or the way Tamara made people feel like the trail was theirs. She wasn't fighting me with facts. She was fighting me with nostalgia, and nostalgia, I've learned, doesn't care about legal boundaries. I went out the next morning to check the damage. More wrappers, more footprints, and one boot print so perfectly centered in the mud beside my creek, I swear it looked staged. I stood there a while, hands in my pockets, trying to decide what kind of neighbor I wanted to be, then remembered, I didn't move here to be a character in someone else's fairy tale. I moved here for peace, privacy, and a chance to restore something that couldn't speak for itself. That trail wasn't just a path. It was a boundary line between 2 different ideas of community, one based on rules and the other based on whoever yells the loudest with the most followers. I walked back to the house, pulled out my camera, and started documenting every square foot of damage. If Tamara wanted to play long game politics, fine, but I wasn't coming to the table empty-handed. The next part, coming soon, trust me. You're going to want to see what happens when HOA drama meets county inspection paperwork, live streams, and a well-timed confession. You'd think that after the hike-through trespassing circus and the trampled trilliums, things might cool off. Nope. Tamara simply shifted the battlefield from dirt trails to digital drama. One morning over coffee, I opened a Pine Hollow community forum out of curiosity, and there it was. New resident disrupts long-standing community tradition. No names, of course, just enough concerned citizen language and passive-aggressive flair to make it obvious who the post was about. I read through comments from people I'd never met. accusing me of privatizing nature, destroying community spirit, and my favorite, probably trying to build a Starbucks back there. It was like being on trial, except the judge was Facebook, the jury was 50 strangers with free time, and the prosecution was someone who once fined a neighbor for mismatched patio furniture. And here's the kicker. None of them had ever set foot on my land. It wasn't just comments, it was the tone, that eerie HOA-flavored righteousness that starts with, "as a long-time resident," and ends with a character assassination disguised as civic duty. It didn't matter that I was trying to protect native species. In Tamara's narrative, I was the villain who paved over memories with legalism and cold-hearted science. She turned my fence posts into symbols of division, my silence into arrogance, and my laminated survey into evidence that I didn't understand the values of the community. It was modern-day digital pitchforks, only instead of flames it was emojis, and instead of truth it was whatever played best in a neighborhood that treated gossip like gospel. That's when Clara stopped by again. She brought scones this time, and a look that said she knew what it felt like to be chewed up by the neighborhood grapevine. We sat on my porch, sipping lukewarm coffee and watching the trees sway like they were staying wisely out of this human mess. "She got me too, you know," Clara said, voice low but steady. 3 years ago, I had 2 hens, just chickens, not roosters. Kids loved them. Tamara fined me $500 for violating neighborhood aesthetic standards. I stared at her, stunned. Chickens? This woman had to give up her chickens because Tamara didn't like the look of poultry. "She doesn't guard the trail, Graham," Clara added. "She guards power. The trail's just her excuse." That sentence stuck with me like a stone in my shoe. Suddenly it all made sense. This wasn't about land, plants, or even community. It was about control. And when people like Tamara feel control slipping, they perform. That's exactly what happened the moment I quietly installed a basic, polite, private property no trespassing sign near the trail's entry point. I didn't make a scene. No speeches, no online posts. Just a 6-inch stake and a hardware store sign with black lettering. A week later, I looked out the window to find Tamara standing in front of the sign with a small crowd. She was narrating the injustice like a park docent explaining the fall of civilization. "This is what happens when newcomers don't respect heritage," she said, gesturing at the sign like it was a tombstone. "He says he's protecting nature, but he's really walling off the soul of our neighborhood." I couldn't make this stuff up. There were even people taking photos, nodding solemnly like they were at a memorial for lost trail rights. That's when I realized I was dealing with something bigger than gossip. This was HOA mythology in motion. Facts didn't matter when feelings were the foundation. Tamara wasn't just feeding misinformation, she was building a whole alternate reality, one where fences equaled selfishness and property lines were acts of aggression. So I did the one thing I still had control over. I documented everything. I filmed the foot traffic, the damage to the creek, the way certain plants stopped blooming where the trail crossed. I wasn't trying to go viral. I just wanted the truth on record. Because in this HOA Hunger Games, receipts were more powerful than reason. But the real turning point hadn't arrived yet. That would come with a spray can, a mourning crowd, and a very dramatic twist. Stick with me. Because the next part is where Tamara trades passive aggression for public vandalism, and I bluff with a security camera that doesn't exist. Yet. And somehow, it still works. I stepped outside one morning and nearly choked on the fumes of fresh outrage. Literally. My modest no trespassing sign had been transformed into a crime scene. Blood-red spray paint screamed "Nature Killer" across the front, dripping like a slasher film title card. And just below that, in what looked like black marker but felt more like a personal attack, "Destroyer of Beauty." My sign wasn't just defaced, it had been sentenced. It was graffiti with a guilt complex, a suburban scarlet letter nailed to my property. I stood there staring at it, coffee in hand, wondering if anyone had ever been cancelled by aerosol. If I had any illusions that this was just a simple neighborly misunderstanding, that morning officially killed them, along with my patience. But it wasn't the vandalism that pushed me over the edge. It was the audience. A small crowd had gathered around the sign like it was a roadside memorial. Phones were out, people were nodding solemnly, and there, center stage, with arms outstretched like a preacher at an HOA revival, was Tamara. "You see what happens," she declared, "when someone tries to privatize nature?" I couldn't tell if she was blaming me for the vandalism or pretending it was divine justice. Either way, she was giving a full TED Talk on community trauma, using my property as her slide deck. And judging by the applause from the woman holding a poodle in a baby carrier, it was working. Tamara didn't just stir drama. She catered it, plated it, and served it up with organic honey. I walked straight up to the crowd, heart pounding but hands steady. "Did you do this?" I asked her directly, nodding toward the vandalized sign. Tamara, never one to waste a spotlight, gasped like I'd accused her of arson. "Graham, I'm shocked you would even suggest such a thing. Clearly, this is what happens when a community is pushed too far." She said it with a tone that suggested she was protecting national forests, not a path her ex-husband bulldozed for a riding mower. I could see the cameras pointing in my direction now, phones held up like shields, some folks clearly hoping for a meltdown they could post with hashtags. I smiled tightly and said, "Well, thankfully I've got security footage." Total bluff. I didn't have a single camera yet. But the twitch in her eye told me that little fib bought me something better than truth. Time. As soon as the crowd dispersed, after Tamara gave closing remarks like she was ending a charity gala, I drove to the hardware store and bought real security cameras. Not that I expected her to return with a spray can, but something told me this performance wasn't a one-act play. That evening, I sat on my porch, installing motion lights and cheap lenses, while thinking about how Tamara had twisted a 6-inch sign into a cultural referendum. The woman could weaponize flower beds. Her HOA theatrics weren't just personal, they were political. It was town hall politics meets daytime television. Except no one ever asked if I wanted to be a cast member. Still, if she was staging drama, I was at least going to make sure the cameras were rolling next time. The real kicker came 2 days later in my mailbox. A flyer for the upcoming HOA meeting. Agenda Item 4, Discussion of Trail Access and Resident Complaints. Translation, me. That's when I knew I had to show up prepared. Not just with facts, but with receipts. I pulled out my survey maps, printed photos of the plant damage, and even labeled areas of erosion with tiny sticky notes like I was prepping for a courtroom drama. Tamara might bring drama, but I was bringing documentation. And for once, I wasn't just defending a boundary, I was defending my name. Stick around. Because what happened at that meeting, let's just say it was less town hall, more reality TV reunion with fluorescent lighting. If this story hit a little too close to home, or reminded you of someone dealing with the same kind of HOA madness, do them a favor, share this video with them. Sometimes, all it takes is hearing someone else stand up to a bully with bylaws to realize you're not alone. And hey, I'd love to hear what you think. Drop a comment below and let me know if your neighborhood's got its own version of Tamara. Let's talk. I walked into the HOA meeting with a manila folder, a recycled grocery bag full of laminated photos, and the calm determination of a guy who's been publicly accused of murdering nature with cedar fence posts. The meeting room looked like it hadn't changed since the Reagan administration. Fluorescent lights, creaky folding chairs, and a faint smell of disinfectant and generational apathy. I was 15 minutes early, not to make an entrance, but to beat Tamara to the narrative. She arrived right on time, flanked by 3 neighbors who looked like they'd been promised a bake sale and were handed court duty instead. Each of them had their own folder, probably color-coded with pre-approved grievances. She smiled at me like she already knew she'd win. That made 2 of us. Just not the same win. When the board finally called for new business, Tamara leapt up like she was accepting an award. "I'd like to address the troubling behavior of our newest resident," she began, waving a hand in my direction like I was a stain on the carpet. Her speech was less complaint, more monologue. Graham has blocked a heritage trail, accused neighbors without evidence, and, my personal favorite, shown disregard for the shared values of Pine Hollow. She spoke with the confidence of someone who'd rehearsed this moment in her bathroom mirror for weeks. And the board? They just blinked at her politely, their expressions somewhere between confused and constipated. It was clear Tamara thought she was rallying the troops, but honestly, they looked more interested in the cookie tray by the coffee urn. When it was finally my turn, I stood up, unfolded my survey map with the kind of theatrical flair you save for birthdays and bombshells, and laid out my case. Calm, factual, no drama. I pointed to erosion zones, highlighted crushed trilliums, explained the native species I was trying to preserve, and even passed around laminated before and after photos like I was pitching an eco-conscious timeshare. I wasn't there to win sympathy. I was there to win clarity. And I could tell it was working. Some folks in the crowd leaned forward. A few uncrossed their arms. That's when I realized the tide was turning, not because I was louder, but because I came with receipts and Tamara came with flair. And then, right on cue, Walt Grayson stood up. 70 years old, beard like an untrimmed bonsai, and a voice that could cut drywall. Funny thing about Tamara talking conservation, he said, voice carrying across the room like a dropped hammer. She's the one who clear-cut 5 acres behind her house in 2008, told the county the trees were a fire hazard. Truth is, she wanted space for a wedding tent and a koi pond. You could hear the oxygen leave the room. Walt continued like he was reading from scripture, only his holy book was county permits and HOA hypocrisy. I've still got the permits if anyone wants to see 'em. Guess those trees weren't part of our heritage trail. Tamara's face went pale and red, then that strange shade of HOA Grey reserved for moments when your narrative collapses mid-performance. She stammered something about safety regulations and approved plans, but the room wasn't buying it. The board leaned in now, papers rustling, pens tapping, and one board member whispered to another like he'd just discovered Wikipedia. Walt sat back down like a man who just put the final nail in a very smug coffin, and I just stood there, arms folded, watching Tamara's crown tilt under the weight of her own history. Stick around, because the next move she makes isn't to apologize, it's to double down on live television, and believe me, it gets messier than mulch in a windstorm. Should have known Tamara wasn't going to take public humiliation lying down. 2 days after Walt dropped the clear-cutting bomb at the HOA meeting, I looked out my front window and saw a satellite van, a woman in a yellow blazer, and Tamara smiling like she'd just won a neighborhood bake-off. Channel 7 News was parked in front of my half-built fence, camera crew assembling like they were prepping for a forest crime scene. Tamara was in full PR mode, hair curled, voice trembling with just the right amount of victimhood. And I swear I saw her dab under one eye for dramatic effect. This used to be a peaceful trail for families, she told the reporter. Now it's being blocked by a man with no regard for community values. Community values? This woman once fined a neighbor for using the wrong color mulch. I stood inside, watching from behind the curtains like a suspicious raccoon. Every sentence Tamara delivered sounded like it had been rehearsed in a car mirror. She even referred to my property as a battleground between tradition and individualism, which is a bold way to describe someone trying to stop you from stomping on endangered flowers. Then she pointed at my fence like it was a brick wall dividing Berlin. "What message does this send to the children?" she asked the reporter. "Lady, I'm trying to save trilliums, not start a dictatorship." But as she posed in front of my fence posts like they were ruins from a fallen civilization, something in me snapped. I realized that if she was going to turn my property into a stage, then I was going to flip the script. That afternoon, I went live. No yellow blazer, no lighting crew, just me, my phone, and a voice full of fed up. "Hi, folks," I said to the camera, walking through the trail like I was narrating a low-budget nature docuseries. "This is what the community trail looks like now." I panned across crushed bleeding hearts, erosion grooves, candy wrappers, and snapped branches. These are the preserved areas Tamara says I'm destroying by blocking foot traffic. I kept my tone calm, steady, and factual, but you could hear the disbelief under every word. Here's where we lost an entire patch of native understory, I added, pointing to bare dirt. And here's what's left of a plant that takes 7 years to bloom, trampled last week during a guided walk. Within 6 hours, the video had over 20,000 views. People started sharing it with captions like, "Finally, someone showing the real story," and "Protect your land, protect your rights." Turns out, HOA drama resonates nationwide. Comments poured in, some supportive, some hilarious, and a few from folks who'd clearly been waiting for their own Tamara moment to be validated. Same thing happened to my uncle in Arizona. Oker tried to fine me for painting my door beige instead of taupe. These people act like they're running the Pentagon. But the real shift happened when I got an email from the Pacific Northwest Native Plant Society. A Dr. Evelyn Mercer had seen my video and wanted to send a team to survey the property. Apparently, I wasn't just protecting my peace. I might have been guarding one of the last intact microhabitats in the county. That was the first night in weeks I slept with the windows open and my shoulders down, because for the first time, it didn't feel like I was fighting alone. Social media had done what bylaws and board meetings couldn't. It leveled the field. Tamara had a news crew, but I had proof. She had rehearsed sound bites. I had crushed trilliums and time-lapse videos. It wasn't just my land anymore. It had become a case study, a rallying point, and, if the Plant Society had anything to say about it, a protected zone. I was still tired, sure, still wary, but I also knew that something had shifted. She used spotlight, I used sunlight, and the difference, as they say, was night and day. And yet, the next escalation? I didn't see it coming. Let's just say it involved a midnight shovel, a fake conservation sign, and a surprise guest appearance from Tamara's adult son. Caught red-handed by my brand-new security cameras, you'll want to see what happens when HOA tactics cross the line into full-on environmental theater. Stay tuned. I didn't expect to catch anyone on camera. That's the thing about installing security. You do it for peace of mind, not because you think someone's actually going to sneak onto your property in the middle of the night with a sign and a small shovel. But sure enough, there it was. 2:15 a.m., motion light flickers on, and in walks Miles Whitlow, Tamara's 28-year-old son, tiptoeing across my lawn like he was on a covert ops mission for the HOA, dressed in all black, holding a cardboard conservation sign, and fumbling with a garden trowel like it was stolen evidence. He knelt near my Pacific Bleeding Hearts plants I'd specifically mentioned in my live stream, and planted the sign like he was claiming the moon for HOA Nation. It would have been funny if it wasn't so predictably crooked. The next morning I got a knock on the door from a county inspector named Janet. Clipboard, neutral tone, badge of calm authority. "We received a complaint," she said, "about possible destruction of protected flora during your fence construction." Of course. I nodded politely, invited her in, and offered to show her the exact spot mentioned in the complaint. We walked down to the site, now freshly graced by a conservation sign that looked like it had been designed on a teenager's laptop, and I gestured to the security camera mounted nearby. "Before we get into botany," I said, unlocking my phone, "you might want to see this." I played the footage of Miles creeping through the brush like a knockoff eco-activist, and watched Janet's eyebrows slowly climb toward her hairline. "This is unusual," she said, pausing the video when Miles dramatically posed with the sign like he was filming a fundraising ad. "So the complaint was that you were disturbing rare species, but—" She pointed at the screen. "This shows someone planting the signage themselves." Hours before the complaint was even filed? I nodded. "And just to be clear, that fence line is more than 50 feet from anything even remotely sensitive." She spent the next 20 minutes documenting the scene, taking photos, and politely confirming that, yes, I was entirely in the clear. Then she gave me a look I hadn't seen from anyone in an official capacity since this whole thing began. She smiled. In 15 years of environmental inspections, I've never seen someone document their innocence this thoroughly. But the real gift came that afternoon. Clara forwarded me a link to a video titled "Helping Mom Save the Trail." Turns out Miles had filmed his midnight adventure and posted a behind-the-scenes vlog for his 87 subscribers. Unfortunately for Tamara, he forgot to set it to private. In the video, he complains about being woken up by his mom, mutters about planting evidence, and even throws in a frustrated, "She better appreciate this because I'm missing my stream tonight." It stayed online for 6 glorious hours, long enough for dozens of neighbors to see it, download it, and circulate it like the HOA version of the Zapruder film. By evening, someone had cut together a highlight reel with dramatic music and subtitles. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my dinner. Tamara had spent weeks building a case based on emotion, implication, and whispered campaigns. I had footage, timestamps, and her son admitting to faking the very eco-crime she accused me of. It was like watching a soap opera get fact-checked in real time. And the best part? I didn't have to lift a finger. Her own household torpedoed her credibility. I knew she'd come back swinging. It's what people like her do. But this time, the cracks in her armor weren't just showing. They were widening. And with the next HOA vote looming, I had a feeling she'd try one last grand gesture to reclaim her crown. The problem? I'd already seen the final act of her performance. And this time, I came prepared with something stronger than evidence. I had the truth. And the audience was finally ready to hear it. Stick around, because what comes next involves forged documents, a surprise guest with a leather satchel full of county records, and the moment Tamara learns that you can't fake history when the original map is older than your lies. If there's one thing Tamara Whitlow doesn't do, it's bow out quietly. So when the HOA announced an emergency meeting, final resolution of the trail access dispute, complete with a community vote, I knew she had something up her sleeve. Sure enough, she walked into the meeting room in full theater mode, stiff posture, legal-looking briefcase, and a face set like granite under pressure. "Neighbors and friends," she began, like she was running for HOA President of the United States. "I bring new documentation that changes everything." Out came a glossy sheet with a county seal, allegedly signed by 3 previous property owners, establishing the trail as a formal community easement. I'll admit, she had the room leaning in. Until I pressed play on my laptop, I didn't say a word, just projected Miles' vlog onto the screen for everyone to see, starting right at the part where he mumbled, "Mom wants me to plant fake evidence again." Phones came out, heads turned. The once silent crowd turned into a slow-moving wave of disbelief. But I wasn't done. "Here's what else we found," I said, holding up a yellowed, hand-drawn survey dated 1886. Walt, bless him, had dug it out of the Historical Society like it was buried treasure. This map clearly shows the trail was never public. It was a private hunting path, seasonal, and never intended for daily use. I pointed to the margin notes. Not a single mention of a public easement in over a century. And then, for the final blow, I held up the property settlement from Tamara's divorce. Section 12, subsection C, her ex-husband, Richard, explicitly signed away any claims to community access through what is now my land. And this document, I added, was signed by Tamara herself. I didn't need a mic drop. The silence did it for me. You could see the truth landing on people like dust shaking off an old book they'd never read. For the first time, the story wasn't coming from Tamara's lips. It was coming from facts, ink, and the people who'd finally had enough. That's when the real shift happened. A black couple I'd never officially met stood up from the back row. The wife, poised and soft-spoken, said, "When we moved in 2 years ago, Tamara reported us 4 times in 3 months. For lawn edges, porch chairs, even our holiday lights." Her husband added, "We nearly moved out, not because of the HOA rules, but because of the selective enforcement." The room went still. No one dared look away. Then another voice chimed in, Clara, holding her daughter's hand. "She made me give up my chickens," she said plainly, "and all I ever wanted was eggs and a little peace." That's when the vote began, not just on the trail, but on what kind of community Pine Hollow was going to be from this point forward. Of the 87 residents present, 76 voted to uphold my property rights and censure Tamara for falsifying documents. Only 11 voted in her favor, 6 of them from the same cul-de-sac where Tamara once threw a mandatory attendance HOA wine mixer. The board not only voided her position on the landscaping committee, they also voted unanimously to refer her forged document to the county. As the crowd trickled out, some folks patted me on the back, others apologized for staying quiet so long, and a few, like Sophia Patel from the board, just smiled and said thank you for standing up. You weren't just protecting your fence, you were protecting all of us. 6 months later, my fence is gone. Not because I lost Humphrey, but because I no longer need it. The county designated my land as a protected habitat, and the Native Plant Society installed signage explaining the ecosystem. Tamara sold her house and moved to live with her sister in Bend. Miles is apparently making TikToks about mental health and HOA trauma. Good for him. As for Pine Hollow, we've got a new HOA board, a new attitude, and a new trail. This one routed along public easement, complete with wooden markers Walt and I built together. Clara started a community garden, and I helped her design it to be pollinator-friendly. Turns out the fence wasn't the problem, it was just the metaphor. Some walls protect, but the real work is in what happens when we take them down. For good reason, peace isn't quiet, it's earned, and out here it finally feels real. If this story helped you or reminded you of someone going through the same fight, do them a favor, share this video with them. Sometimes standing up to the wrong person helps the right people find their voice. And if you've got your own HOA horror story, leave a comment below. You're not alone anymore. And that's how it ended. Not with a fight, but with a garden. Not with more bylaws, but with better boundaries. Funny how the loudest people in the room often make the quietest exits. Tamara's voice once echoed through Pine Hollow like gospel. Now, it's her absence that makes space for others to speak. People don't just wave when they walk by anymore. They stop, they ask questions, they share stories. The trail's still here, but now it tells the truth. And my land? It finally feels like mine. No drama, no patrols, no paperwork on my porch. Just creek water, native plants, and peace earned the hard way. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Sometimes the real fight isn't about a fence, a flower bed, or a trail. It's about who gets to control the story. Tamara tried to weaponize history. I just let the truth speak for itself. And when people saw the truth, really saw it, they chose justice over noise, respect over reputation, and community over control. We forget this too often, but one neighbor with courage can change the direction of a whole neighborhood. So if this story gave you something, a little perspective, a few laughs, or just a reminder that you're not crazy for standing your ground, do me a favor, share it with a friend who might need to hear it too. Because trust me, someone else out there is dealing with their own version of this HOA Queen, and they don't even know they've got the power to push back. Leave a comment below and tell me, have you ever had to stand up for something you believed was right, even when the whole block made you feel like the villain? I'd love to hear your story. And if you want more real stories like this, where ordinary people stand up, speak out, and remind the world that dignity doesn't come with a title, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. We've got more stories coming your way that prove one thing. Sometimes the smallest fence can start the biggest movement. You've stayed till the end, and that means something. Thank you. Let's keep growing something better together.